Hey everyone, it's Peter from Daydream Nation, and I've got Joe B back to the channel. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. I'm a week away from hitting the big 6-0.
Oh, happy birthday to you, dude.
Yeah.
Great to have you back on the channel.
Oh, it's
Um,
always good to be here. Yeah.
Fantastic. We are going to talk about the new Judas Priest album. It's not so new, it's been out for a couple of weeks, but I always like to hang back a couple of weeks, give it a fair listen, and then give my synopsis. So there it is. I've got the CD with the three bonus tracks, and you've got a little bit
Yeah.
of vinyl
So I
there.
have the black vinyl and I'm going to open up the purple or pink vinyl on my review. But I have to agree with you 100%. You have to take a step back. Plus, everybody's pumping out reviews on this album. But
Yes.
if you got to let it settle in at least a couple weeks before you can make an honest review of the album. And sometimes longer. Like last year, Mammoth WVH Wolfgang Van Halen, it took me literally a month to really say, okay, this is the best album of the year. So
Yeah, yeah. Look, likewise, I had to give it a fair listen, and I can tell you some of the reviews were just over the top. Like there was one reviewer on a YouTube channel said it was the best Priest album ever. So we'll talk about those sort of accolades. But Joe, just to start things off, what is the sweet spot for you in respect to Judas Priest? Name one or two albums which is a
well,
sweet spot
I
for you.
I got in at Hellbent for Leather, so that's always my sweet spot. And then from there, we went backwards, and Stained Class just hit me like a lightning bolt. But I'll tell you what, Unleashed in the East is one of my top three or four live albums, and that's just absolutely phenomenal because as they did in the '70s with the live albums, they really ramped up the production and made it heavier.
Yeah.
And Sinner, the ultimate peak for me, Judas Priest is listening to Sinner off that album with headphones on because I still get chills up and down my spine when I listen.
Yeah. Well, that's a mighty fine album. The sweet spot for me is British Steel, Rapid Fire, and Steeler. I just get a
Yeah.
shiver up my spine. And Screaming for Vengeance, where it went into the 80s and it was even more amplified. I love that. So that's probably the two albums that are the sweet spot. So it's
And
really
you're
good that
probably
it's really good we give our viewers a bit of context as we go into this album as to what our sweet spots are.
right. And I think your sweet spot is a lot with the majority of Priest fans because they really
Yep.
got into it. My Dark Horse is Point of Entry. I don't think that's a bad album at all. I know it was an in-between album. But yeah, no, British Steel and Screaming for Vengeance is
Yep.
that's what, yeah, that's the sweet spot for a lot of fans, most fans.
Okay, well, we'll just do a bit of a dive on the tracks. So, the first thing that hits me is there are three opening songs straight off the bat, and it reminds me of a 1980s speed metal album. They're just hell for leather, and you've basically, they're firing on all cylinders. So maybe we'll talk about Panic Attack. What do you think of that song?
Well, Panic Attack brings me back to Painkiller. There's they have that, it kind of scared me with that turbo, that sound, but I knew it was going to be all good. Not a fan of turbo. But no, Panic Attack is great. I think Serpent and the King is just where it really starts taking it to the next level. So Panic Attack is a great opener, and for me, it gets better from there. You're you hit 100% correct on the speed metal because I feel that the beginning of Invincible Shield sounds like Metallica's first album.
Yeah, I think it's like the early days of, one of those speed metal albums that came from San Francisco, the Bay City Thrashers, with a touch of new wave of British heavy metal. I love that first song. I think it's a cracker. I don't mind the synth start.
Oh, I
I
don't
know
either. I
you
mean,
a little
it's
bit of
great.
synth wave. It gives a little bit of
Yeah,
drama, so it does sort of reflect on Turbo.
I feel it sounds more. They had the whole. It was supposed to be a double album, Painkiller and Turbo. So it sounds like Painkiller to me because they
Yeah,
do have the drums, but it's very heavy and very fast.
yeah. but it's a cracker. There's a bit of conjecture how much Glenn Tipton actually contributed to the album because of Parkinson's. Reading between the lines, contributed to the album where he could, where he physically could, and the rest of it he was giving a lot of directions to Richie Faulkner. But I've got to say off the bat, Richie Faulkner's probably the best heavy metal guitarist going around. The playing on this album is superlative.
Man, he's one of my favorite guitar players. He's just great. And I saw him on the Redeemer of Souls tour, and I'm like, holy cow, this guy's awesome. And he just got better from there. And the thing I really like about him, well, there's a lot of things I really like about him. He does bring back a lot of the different aspects of Priest. And I like the fact that he is influenced a lot by like Jimi Hendrix and guitarists like that, because he's from England and he's not the Ace Frehley, right? Or even Jimmy Page. He's got that. He's just, yeah, he's great. He's one of my favorite guitarists. You nailed it once again.
Yeah, I think it's a superlative job, and he's basically playing two parts. So
he is.
It's a
with all these. I'm sorry. With all these new albums, you bring up an interesting point, and sometimes I would not be surprised if it's mainly Richie, Rob, and Scott on the album with a little bit of backup from the producer, Andy Snape. I don't know how much input Glenn Tipton has, and even the bass sounds most prominent on this album more than any other Priest album.
I've never heard Ian Hill wondering so much in the mix.
I don't know if Ian Hill's actually playing. It could. I wouldn't doubt if Richie Faulkner's playing bass. You never know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was another thing. Yeah. Ian Hill's bass is way up in the mix.
Yes.
So that's a surprise. Look, Richie Faulkner's guitar work on Panic Attack. You've got these ascending arpeggios. It's sublime, and I like the lyrics. A little bit of social commentary. A little bit of bite, everything, all the badness in the world and the world leaders. And, Rob's trying to do a little bit of above the sword and sorcery, but do a little bit of social commentary. So I think this is
you know what? You are hitting everything spot on, because one of the first things I noticed when the whole Ukraine-Russia war started, they had a date in Kiev, and they had a date in Moscow, instantly canceled. So you wonder, right? Because they played those spots. Yeah.
I think I like that he's bringing in sort of world politics into the lyrics. All right, The Serpent and the King, a lot of falsetto. It's really, and he's got this scream that harks back to classic awesome. Rob Halford in early 1980. Look, you don't know how much is studio trickery, but I can live with it, and it sounds fine. Speed metal. It's another speed metal song.
Yeah, it's great. This is it just slowly takes off, and then it just shoots off like a rocket. I mean, full disclosure, there's not a bad song on this album, and Richie Faulkner.
There's a couple that I'll get into as we get deeper that I think we could talk about.
So it's going to be hard for me. Sorry, go on. It's going to be hard for me to criticize this album whatsoever. I absolutely love it. So. Yeah. Unlike we did that Stones album, and I think this is entirely different. I think with the Stones album, which I still listen to and still enjoy, but you had a producer that took tropes and he's doing that with Pearl Jam, obviously, next month when that comes out. This, I think, is full on Richie Faulkner, Andy Sneap, Rob Halford saying, okay, we're going to take some of here and there from our past, but we're going to this is going to be organic.
Yeah. There are a couple of reservations, and I'll bring that up, and we'll see what your views are. Invincible Shield, another great track. Now, this time, the vocals of Rob are double-tracked. So you've got the high Rob and the low Rob that are parallel with each other. Quite unusual. So it gives a little bit of extra strength. And then in the chorus, what I love about Priest? I love when they do the power chords. So it's going back to the old 70s, just getting the power chords out. What do you think of this song?
Oh, it's great. Like I said, it starts out. I got flashbacks from Kill 'Em All by Metallica, but then it goes full on Priest, and what a great song. Yeah.
Yep.
And I agree with you 100%. And there's going to be other songs in here where they do the power chord, he does the chunking guitar. It's just,
Yes.
yeah, I love it. Yeah.
That's my sweet spot with Priest. Not necessarily the arpeggios and the shredding. I love the power chords, and you got Hill on the bass that's just pumbling on the bubbling on the bass, and you got a bit of a groove. Now that's another thing I want to talk about. This leads into the next song called "The Devil in Disguise." I think it's kind of a relation of Devil's Child. I don't know. I couldn't get it out of my head. It reminded me a little bit of Devil's Child off Screaming for Vengeance, maybe because of the word the devil.
Right.
But this is where the deficiencies of Scott Travis as a drummer come into the play. And there's one of our friends to the channel, Peter Jones. We have a lot of conversations about, the drumming on Priest. And one thing I've got to say, and I do agree, is that I don't think Scott Travis has groove. He plays a lot with the double kick and he does a lot of the speed metal and all that sort of stuff. But when it comes down to a slow, mid-tempo or slower song, you can see there's a bit of a deficiency to me in regards to Scott Travis's drumming. I kind of miss the Dave Holland groove or Les Binks, where there's
Les Binks, yeah.
you've got
Yeah.
basically somebody in the pocket.
I feel as though they have a hybrid here. I know where Peter's coming from because he's deep about his drums. Yeah, I mean, they have a guy that's versatile and can play all those different styles, but
I
maybe you
do
want
miss that groove. I do miss the
Yeah,
groove
yeah,
because,
yeah.
Dave Holland, he just had a closed hi-hat and a single bass drum. So
Right.
listen, I was listening to British Steel straight after this, and I was just listening to what he just did with that drum kit, and he was in the pocket, slow, medium, fast, but he would always have that swing and that groove. I don't get the feel with Travis. I think Travis is more of a speed metal drummer, and he just uses the double kick all the way through, but he really gets exposed when he's doing a slower or mid-pace song where there's not as much imagination or much variation, and the song kind of lacks that. It lacks that little bit of groove. I know maybe nitpicking, but I do miss Les
No, I
Binks
get what you're
and I
saying.
do miss Dave
It
Holland.
doesn't bother me as much. I feel it's more you're hearing like a session drummer. I get what you're saying, but it doesn't bother me that much.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're going to get into this too, and we talk about when we get through the album
Yep.
about where it stands and everything.
Yep. All right. Gates of Hell. So this is another weird song because you read the lyrics and he's talking about the gates of hell. And I love how Rob Halford, how he uses the words feast and priest, and he really puts a lot of emphasis on it. It's
Is he
like one of his
saying
favorite
Is he
words.
saying purgatory, but he's saying purgatory? That's what.
The music's really upbeat for
Yeah.
a song that's in Gates of Hell. I thought that was a bit strange. You're talking about,
Right.
something evil and, so the
Yeah.
gates of Hades. But musically, it's kind of a bit more of a positive song. I mean, what did you think of this?
Again, I like it a lot. It's
Yep.
great. It's great. That's the one thing, like the opening lyric where he says, I don't know if I got to look at the lyrics. I didn't open up my album yet, but yeah, it's not. It sounds like he's saying purgatory, but he's saying purgatory. It's got to be. He's got to be saying purgatory. But I like the sound of it. I like the groove. I like the lyric aspect of it. I like the concept.
Yep.
It's yeah,
You are right. The first lyric, it's a long way down to purgatory.
yeah, but purgatory. So we say purgatory, it's
Yeah.
purgatory.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
Crown of Thorns. So this is like a uber power ballad. It's like a priest power ballad.
Right. This
And
was
I
their
read,
this was their release
yeah,
that was came out months before the album.
yeah.
And it still is great.
I like it. I like it. I think
Yeah.
it's heartfelt. He's talking about finding love, and it's a deep song for him spiritually. That's what he said. It's his religious song, so it's
Yeah.
about him finding Christ. So I think that's quite interesting. So
You
it's
know,
a very
it's
reflective
he
song.
has he has a religious part to him. He did those Christmas albums, and they're almost all religious Christmas songs. And he also, for years, he lived in Phoenix, and he was donating like clothes and toys and money anonymously to a charity every Christmas. And then
Mm,
they found out it was him. So he comes, it's a traditional background where it's great. But Crown of Thorns, I mean, right off the bat, I'm like, okay, this album's going to be great.
yeah,
It's going to be better than Firepower just from this song alone when I heard it. And it still stands up after all these months.
yeah. I think it's a very sincere, heartfelt song, and it's just talking about his spirituality later in life. And there's some lyrics that if you don't sing with conviction, you don't sell it. And I think he sells this one really well. So
Right.
I don't have a problem, where it's placed. It's a power ballad. I like it. So I think it's a really good song. So then we go to As God as My Witness. I put down here power metal,
Right.
Euro power metal. So they're
So
mining a
here,
lot of the power metal, the double kick drums, the very neoclassical guitar runs. I
so
think Rob has a lot of fun with this song.
if there's a song I want to skip, it's this one because the next four songs are awesome. But I don't skip it. It's still great. I'm cheating
Yep.
myself if I skip it, but I'm so excited to get to the next four songs that you know the next four songs is where it just goes to another level for me.
Okay. Well, we'll
Yeah.
get into Trial by Fire. I think this is an interesting song. It's got a bit of a gothic feel to it.
Right.
Um,
It starts like you hear that victim of changes type riff in there, so it's on there. But
it's got a really grungy, down-tuned riff, but
right.
the backup vocals, it reminded me of like some medieval chant, and you've got the big chime, that real doomy
Yeah.
chime. So I think it's a fine song. It's really gothic.
Yeah.
I
It's
like
great.
it
And
a
like I
lot.
said, they pulled out that victim of changes, but they play around with it and it
Yep.
works. Yeah.
Rob's voice is in fine form, isn't it? As I
Yes.
said, there's probably some enhancement. A lot of artists, they do that with the AI, with the auto tune. But I've just got to take it at face value. On this record, he sounds magnificent. He
Yes.
really does.
Yeah.
I've got, no issue with that. Escape from Reality.
Okay, this song is awesome. I'm sorry. Yeah. And the most awesome part of it does a great change. And when I first heard Judas Priest, it immediately came to my head. I'm like, he kind of sounds like Ozzy. And then
Yes.
he filled in for Ozzy at that one show in California in the 90s. Let me tell you something. That when it goes into that weird part, and it also so it's a combination of him sounding like Ozzy, and that when it does the change,
The process
and
voice.
yeah, and it also kind of reminds me. I loved Rob's solo projects in the '90s, whether it was Fight or Two or Halford. The Halford Resurrection album is phenomenal. Almost feel it's got that weird Two album, when he did with John Five and I think the guy from Nine Inch Nails was involved. But yeah, it works for me. This I don't know. I don't know if I can say it's the favorite song of mine, but it's up there. This is the sweet spot. These songs for me.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I
Yeah.
agree with you, but I wrote down it was very much like Ozzy, and he's trying something different. So there's a little bit of variety. Hey, I tell you, when I first heard this album, I wasn't sure that I liked it, and it's a real grower. It sounds like with
It's
you that
definitely a
this
growth. I
album,
mean, I liked it immediately, but it's getting better for me. Yeah.
yes, but it took me a couple of weeks of intensive playing, and I have to admit that all the noise about this is the best album, this is great and great, I kind of rebelled a little bit because when people put this view out, I think a part of me kind of rebels against it. Like, what are you talking about? So I think
Right.
I put a bit of a barrier up, but it wore me down, and it was multiple listens, and it sort of has won me over. But I had
Yeah.
to listen to it, and you've got to listen to an album a few times. You just can't listen to it twice and just go out there and start, you know,
Right.
putting some sort of appraisal. So
Yeah.
I really like that track a hell of a lot. Sons of Thunder.
It's the shortest song on the album. I really like it. I believe he's talking. It's about bikers. It's another one of his old time passions. It sounds like that. I haven't read the lyrics, but am I right there? Or?
I wrote down Free Will Burning. It's a rollicking tune. It's got the gang vocals. It's got a little bit
Yeah.
of a synth
Yeah.
enhancement.
Right.
I love it. I think
Yeah.
it's really good.
Yeah.
Um, and then we finish off the proper album per se, without the bonus tracks, with Giants in the Sky. I wrote that
Yeah.
it's got a bit of a Hendrix or a riff that early John Roth would, love to, put down. It's got a kind of a bit of a classic rock riff, but
Yeah.
I put down Travis has no groove on this track. If you had somebody like a Dave Holland or somebody that was a bit more in the pocket, this would have been even a better song. So again, it comes into that category where it's not speed metal and it's a bit slowed down. It's sort of the bottom end gets a little bit exposed, and that's just my quibble on this particular song.
Yeah. So I apparently he's singing about all of his rock heroes.
Yep.
Yeah. So the Hendrix thing is appropriate, but yeah, I find it's a great tribute to the rock heroes that influenced Rob.
Yep.
Now, my probably my favorite song on the album is "Fight for Your Life," which isn't on the proper album because that starts out with like a stained class "Hellbent for Leather" riff,
Yes.
and
70s. It's like the
yeah.
70s.
But the another thing that really it catches me when you change key in mid song, whether it's "Surrender" by Cheap Trick or this, I'm in. I'm all in. It's like I'm like, okay, this is awesome, and it's not in the proper album. But it might be my favorite song.
It should have
I'm
been in the proper album.
yeah,
I could
I'm
have lost one of
peeling.
those other songs that I referred to. For example, just looking at the list, I could have lost maybe Devil in Disguise, which I think is a little bit
Yeah, or as God
generic.
is my witness, I think it could have
Yep.
been. Yeah, yeah.
To
It's
give it a
it's
bit more of a bit more pace, because I guess a slight quibble with the album is a lot of the songs are of a similar pace, especially the speed metal ones. And to give
yeah.
it a bit more variety, I would have slot that in. I don't mind the Lodger. You
I
may
love the
not.
Lodger. Yeah.
Um, it reminds me of Nostradamus.
So
It's got that
he didn't write
symphonic
this
feel
song.
to it.
Is this a cover tune or because I think it's the only song they didn't write. It's attributed to someone else, I believe.
Songwriters Bob Hallican Jr.
This album suffers by not having those two songs on here.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think it's symphonic. I like the lyrics. Vengeance is mine. It's got a great chorus. It's full of drama, and you got that nice little classical guitar bit right at the end, and that's just
Yes,
a nice little finale to the album, mate. This is the sort of album that Iron Maiden should be doing.
agreed.
Um,
I said this on my Bruce Dickinson show with Melissa. Uh, yeah, Steve Harris gets way too bloated, and Bruce Dickinson did it right. It doesn't sound totally like Maiden. One song is an Iron Maiden song. I think it even
mm,
sounds better because he has some editing, he has some producing. So yeah, I agree with you. You've been
yeah.
like 99% correct on everything today, Peter. So
I don't know if there's anything called a correct answer, friend, but
no one's 100%, but yeah,
yeah, look, yeah. So, what are my reservations? The drumming. So, it shows the limitations. But if you can get past that, I think Richie Faulkner's guitar work, the arrangements are just so wonderful. With this, a lot of, I would imagine, as I said, Glenn Tipton behind the scenes is doing a lot of directions, even though he hasn't
yeah,
played it. I think the arrangements are great. Halford sounds wonderful. His bass playing, I've never heard him so, you know, engaged. It's really he's fully vibed, his bass playing. Um, I would have liked some of the special edition songs to be injected into the main album to give it a bit more
Yes.
variety, you know.
Yeah.
Album cover, yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what you think
I
about
mean,
the
it
album
falls in line
cover.
with Firepower,
Yeah,
right?
it's
Yeah.
not as iconic as like British Steel or some of those.
No.
I like the 70s album covers, but all in
Yeah.
all, I think it's a very good album. And to think that they're all early 70s, late 60s, like Richie Faulkner's the youngster in the group, and he's in his 50s. Correct me if I'm
Right.
wrong. They're on fire. They've got a lot of verve, and this is really, you've got to say, they're in a bit of a career revival, a late career revival, with
Yeah.
Firepower laying down the platform. So it's a
Yeah.
very good album. But is it the best Priest album? No, because
It's not, it's hard. Well, first of all, it would stand up to the best Priest albums if they would have included those last three songs, which I think was a big mistake because Fight for Your Life is just great. But it's hard to compare because in a way it's an entirely different band,
yes,
and they've always had different drummers. They're like Spinal Tap with the
mm,
drummers constantly changing. But yeah, I feel that it's hard for me to really compare, and it is definitely not up there with. Like I said, those last three songs should have been included. Then we'd be talking about it being up there for me because with those last three songs, I listen to it constantly. Like I said, the sweet spot is for me is Trial by Fire all the way through to the Lodger. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, it's hard. Like, is it Hellbent for Leather? No. Is it Stained Class? No.
It's not
I
British
mean,
Steel. I guess
yeah,
the reason why I like those albums is because of the power chords.
right.
Less shred, more power chords. There's a lot of power chords in this album, but there's a lot of
Yeah,
shred, and they are definitely. It's modern. It's a modern metal album, even though there are hints and referencing to the olden days. Even more so with the bonus three tracks. It's a very modern sounding album. My point of entry, pardon the pun, for Judas Priest has been those 70s albums. And the Priest sound to me, which is my sweet spot, is always the power chords and
yeah,
the trade-off of the guitars
right.
and
And
the
now Richie's
and a
doing all the
drummer
work.
that's in the pocket. So, you know,
I would say this is probably the best album since Screaming for Vengeance. I did not get it. I mean, I liked Firepower a lot. Redeemer of Souls was okay. I did
Painkiller.
not.
Painkiller
Pain,
gets
I
referenced a
think this is
lot.
better than Painkiller. I was not. Turbo really turned me off, as you know. I'm not a fan. But yeah,
Mm.
Ram It Down and Painkiller were like okay, and Defenders of Faith too. It did nothing for me at the time. I thought it was a lame follow up to Screaming for Vengeance, in my opinion. So I would say this is the best album since Screaming for Vengeance.
Even Defenders of the Faith, which was a
And
mighty
Defenders
fine
of the Faith.
follow-up. That was pretty
I
good.
did I did not like that album that much. I was
Right.
kind of I don't know. It I don't know what happened. So I thought it was good, but it really didn't like blow me away like all the previous
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah.
And then and then of course there was Turbo. And then I didn't like Angel of Retribution, the
Mm.
Ripper stuff. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I think it's definitely the best modern era Priest, in the
Yeah.
last 20 years or so. I think we both agree. But I just think you can't say this is the greatest Priest album. It is
No.
nowhere near the
I mean,
level of
I'm just looking at
British
I'm yeah,
Steel.
Hellbent for Leather. I'm looking at Stained Class, and Stained Class is a
Yeah.
mind trip. Like,
Yeah. And mate, even looking at the lyrics of those albums, a lot of it was very social commentary and it was about Rob, your reflection of who he was when he was like
Yeah,
young in England and the repression sort of side of things. I don't
right.
think that this album, yeah, there's a bit of self-reflection. There's a lot of swords and sorcery type of fantasy, which I don't mind. But some song like Breaking the Law, you look at the lyrics of that, it says more in a 3 minute song than a lot of it's just
Yeah,
so spot on to what was happening in England in under Margaret Thatcher or in that era than a lot of songs. And I just
right.
think you can't put an album like this above, the songwriting with Tipton, Downing, and Co. I think that was at their stone cold peak. But this is a mighty fine album.
I agree. Yeah, and you're right. And it's really hard to compare because like it's almost an entirely different band with Richie Faulkner at the helm, and not in a bad way, but
Mm,
you have one featured guitarist where it was a dual guitar band forever.
yep.
But they were, I mean, Angel of Retribution. I don't know. I can't get through that album. For when they
Mm,
came back with Rob. I mean, Rob Halford Resurrection. This stands up. Maybe Resurrection I might still like better.
yep.
That was a Priest album than what Priest did in the '90s. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, nevertheless, it's a great album. I wish they would have included the other songs. I mean, you can. I mean, I listen to it on iTunes, so it doesn't matter. But for those who buy the physical product, it's too bad that they didn't include those last three
Yeah,
songs.
well, it's on the special edition, the three
Yeah,
tracks. I just think
yeah,
it's a direction that I would have loved them to explore. And if they've got one more album in them, I'd love them to go even further down that track and maybe do a full-on retro 70s album. And I'm talking
yeah.
about Sad Wings of Destiny. Maybe that first album. Okay, bring on the hate, folks, but I
What,
could
Rock and
I could
Rolla?
handle that.
Yeah.
Just power
No,
chords, slow it down a bit,
I'll
bit
tell
more
you
of a
what, man.
groove.
Unleashed in the East, though, is I know it's a live album and people don't like to include live albums, but holy cow, is that album brilliant.
Yeah.
I and then they did a reissue with extra songs like Starbreaker and oh, man, yeah. So I listen to that constantly, you
Yeah.
know. But yeah,
Will we be
I'm
listening to this album in a year's time? Or
that's a
will
good
we be going
question.
back into the oldies?
That's a good question because Melissa and I talked about that with the new Bruce Dickinson because I'm so over the moon about that album. And she's like, well, we'll find out if it's stands the test of time for listening to it a year from now or 2 years from now. It's an album I'll probably go back to. I'm going to go back to Firepower, which I haven't done in a while,
Mm,
just to, compare. But it will be an album that I've gone back to. There's some albums I haven't listened to in years and went back to, and I'm like, holy crap, this album is great.
yeah.
That's what happens. I mean, you can see the collection behind you when you have so much music, and it's
Mm,
kind of. I see it as a benefit because it's like you're discovering new music when you revisit something you haven't listened to in years.
yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to do a show with you sometime, maybe in 12 months' time, if and to go back and revisit some of our reviews and say, Joe, do we still listen to this album? Do we
Yeah.
still listen to Hackney Diamonds? Do we still listen to the Invincible Shield? Do we still listen to the Bruce Dickinson album?
Right.
And be honest with ourselves and say, why
Yeah.
don't we?
Right.
Because there's
So,
one thing I think that we're of an age that we just love the music that we got into when we were 18 or as teenagers is the one that hooks us in
yes.
always. And it's
Yeah.
preference. We will always, when I go back there, I will go to the albums that I bought when I was a teenager or 18. No matter how good these modern albums are or the ones that are coming through, we always go back to that. And it's just, I don't know, it's just something that's in kind of, it's hard to
Yeah.
break.
That being said, I will say because of this album, because of Bruce Dickinson, because of Wolfgang Van Halen, because of the Stones, even Greta Van Fleet, I've been listening to new music 80 to 85% more than going back and listening to albums that are 10, 20, 30, 40 years old. So this last year and a half or year and a quarter have been just phenomenal for new music. And I never thought I would see that.
Yeah.
This consistency that has come out. I mean, it comes here and there. The Midnight album, well, the Midnight album,
Mm.
that's kind of, I like the previous two better than that. But yeah, that's what's great about this album, and that's what's great about Bruce Dickinson and Wolfgang Van Halen. It's that I'm really hooked in with new music, and that's
Yeah.
about 80 to 85% of what I listen to recently.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you, Joe. As always, great to have you on the channel.
always great to
Please,
be here.
please
I love
check
talking to
out
you.
Wasting Time with Average Joe. Lots of great content and interviews. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Please put your views on what you think of this album. Is this the greatest Priest album of all time, or the greatest album since whatever, or maybe the pile of bullocks? I don't know. You put your opinions. We love reading it. But one thing's for sure, you'll see me and Joe in 2024 doing a bit of an album dive on something or other. Take care.
Yeah,
We'll see you soon. Cheers.
thanks, Peter.